Okay, I'll be starting the intro now. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. We welcome you all. So, would you agree if I say, right from a baby, learning to speak words to a professional translator, everyone translates? Well, you have to, because that's the most unrealized truth. The non native speaker of any language, for example, thinks in tongue, translated to, say, English in mind, and then speaks out. You can obviously experience this, especially during extempore or impromptu speaking. Hope it's adequate to agree with, and yes, today's INLIT webinar series is all about translation in relation to many aspects. To present this, we have amidst us Aparna Jith, a research scholar from the Center for Applied Linguistics and Translation Studies, University of Hyderabad, Telangana. If you think writing a story or any piece of writing for that matter is difficult, then let's just know that translating it to the other language or form is much more difficult. An excellent translator is required to have mastery over both the languages and, moreover, has no right to add or remove or change nothing of the original copy, but just replicate and retain the essence amidst all grammatical, lexical complications in either languages. Translation is like a puzzle. There'll be more than one solution, and you have chosen the closest possible. Cause remember, you have no right to incorporate your creativity. Now, let's try learning more about this complex, and hopefully, Aparna Jit will lead us in the right track. Over to you, Ms. Aparna.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I'll start sharing my screen now. I hope everyone can see my screen now. Is it visible?
Yes, yes, it's clear. It's visible. You can start. Okay.
Okay. So good day, everyone. I'm hoping that everybody is safe and secure at home, considering the current situation worldwide. But that has actually brought us all together, I'm hoping, thanks to all the webinars and online activities that are happening. And I'm hoping that a lot of people can get to listen to others, which is not actually possible otherwise. You'll have to travel or you'll have to be there in person to listen to someone. So I'm hoping that the situation has put forth something positive. Anyway, talking about translation, how should I say? What Ronald said is in a way correct. Translation is like a puzzle. There is no one single way to go about it. There are multiple ways to translate something. There are multiple perspectives. That depends on the translator. That depends on where, which culture, which part of the globe you are from, your own life experiences, the complexity or the intricacy of the genre, the language that you are translating from and into, etc., etc., etc. Anyway, translation as a process, every single person, knowingly or unknowingly, you must have done at least a single act of translation in your life, okay, everyday life. For example, say you are sitting and watching a YouTube video, and your friend who is from a different linguistic community is asking you, what's the joke? Why are you laughing? What are you laughing about? You will explain it to him or her in the common language that you speak. May it be Hindi, English, German, Spanish, whatever it is. That is an act of translation. Then there is, you might be listening to a piece of music. Your friend is listening to it. They don't know the lyrics of the song, but they're interested in knowing it. You must have translated something of that sort. You must have told someone else the way to a place, a foreigner, a tourist. You must have told them the way to a place that they don't know about. So each and every single person must have done at least one act of translation in their life. You don't have to be a professional translator. You must have done it in one way or the other. You might not be aware about it, but you must have done it. Then what is translation? What exactly do you mean by the word translation? According to the dictionary, it has, again, multiple meanings. Okay, complicated. It doesn't have one single meaning. It is the process of moving words or text from one language to another. That's one meaning, the simplest meaning. The next one is the process of moving something from one place to another. That's a more technical, formal meaning. Then comes the verb form, which is to convert something or be converted into another form or an entirely different medium altogether. That's also translation. So all these meanings, all the different meanings I have taken from Oxford Advanced Learners Dictionary. That's just one dictionary, okay, from one language. Different meanings for translation, different words which show the process of translation exists in different languages, multiple words at times, to show or to describe this act of translation that you do. Now, the word translation in English, the etymology lies, it came from Latin, the Latin word trans and fere. I obviously don't know Latin, so please excuse my pronunciation. So trans means across and fere means to bear. So it's to bear something across, okay, and that becomes transfer. Or later in Middle English, it became transfer. So the basic meaning of the word transfer is to carry forward or carry across something from somewhere to another place, or in our daily language, from one text to another. That's the basic meaning. Moving forward, what exactly is the process of translation that we use? Now, different disciplines have always had translation. They have used translation as a tool. Okay, literary studies use translated text. If it's English literature, say, they study translated text from, say, French, Italian, or Russian, American, whichever it is, Indian English literary studies. So if you are a student of literary studies, you must have studied at least one translated text. Okay. The problem is that sometimes you learn it as an English text and you are not even aware about the fact that that's a translated text. It's not been written first in another language, a foreign language. So like the same way, translation as a tool, as a skill, has been used in multiple different disciplines. Okay, scientific texts have been translated, equations, all the theories, that has been translated. The scientists from one part of the globe, if they have to communicate, they need an interpreter or a translator who translates the text so that another person on the opposite side of the globe can read it. Then, comparative literature, it still uses translation studies as a subsidiary kind of. It's part of translation studies is part of comparative literature. It's also part of machine translation, which is part of linguistics. A lot of other areas, other disciplines use translation as a tool. Now, let's look at some of the commonly used terminologies that I will be using in the lecture and that you will have to be familiar with so that it becomes easier to communicate. Okay. So translation is carrying across of meaning from one language, which is the source language, to another language or the target language. So SL is source language, TL is target language. So say you are translating something from Hindi to English. Hindi is the source language here, and English is the target language. Now, the same way, there is a source text and a target text. The text that you are translating, say the Hindi text, is the source text, and the English text, the translated text, that is target text. Okay. So these are the basic terminologies that you need to know. Then moving forward. So what do you think was the first translation? I mean, whose was the first translation? Who did the first translation? Now, each culture, each linguistic culture, each geographical location, they have their own stories and ideas about how translation first happened in their language, because there will be multiple language, there will be language interaction between people from different languages, there will be trade happening, there will be people traveling from one place to another, traders, merchants. So you need to communicate. And how did that communication take place when you are from two linguistic backgrounds? Now, at that time, there was no translation studies. Nobody even knew about the whole word translation. Nothing would have been formed. Now, Rosetta Stone is one of the important metaphors of translation in the translation studies discipline. Okay, it's a Rosetta Stone, which is shown in the picture. It's a 196 BC Egyptian stone stele, which was discovered by a French officer. And what is important, what is interesting about Rosetta Stone is that this piece of stone stele had three inscriptions. The same side had inscriptions in three different scripts of the same message. Okay, if it was from what archaeologists say, it was put forth by Ptolemy the fifth, and then later on moved by some other intruders who were in Egypt, and it became a building block of a separate house, okay, building, which was then later on discovered by, rediscovered by an archaeologist from France. Now, the three different scripts that are found in this Rosetta Stone is first the hieroglyphics, then the same message, Egyptian message, was in Demotic script, and the third and the last one was in ancient Greek. So you can see the translation act that has taken place here. Okay, the same message was translated into three different scripts. Okay, now moving on to the history of translation and the multiple classifications that are in existence. There are so many different classifications based on the genre of translation, based on the time period, based on the theory or practice aspect, etc., etc., etc. For now, I'm basing it on Susan Basnett's History of Translation chapter from her book Translation Studies. Those who are interested, it's available online. Please do go and read it if you're interested in knowing more about it. Now, Susan Basnett, what she has done is that she has explained the act of translation, the process of translation, the idea about translation that the theoreticians, the literary, literature-based people, the writers, the translators had, the opinions they had about translation based on chronology, okay, based on the time period. And she, first of all, she puts forward the idea that translation is not a secondary activity, in the sense there is a general opinion that a writer writes. Okay, that's the primary process, primary relationship with the text, or the author is the one who writes the original kind of thing, and the translator is in a secondary position or a lower position, and the translation hence is in a lower position because there is a loss that you incur while you do the act of translation. When you translate from one language, the source language, to target language, there will always be this loss. That was the general opinion earlier on, and hence most people viewed translation as a secondary activity, little subservient activity to writing as such, and it was not viewed as a creative process. Now, according to later theoreticians, translators like George Steiner and Susan Bassnett, etc., translation is in every way a primary activity. Okay, and Susan Bassnett uses a diagram of communication relationship in the process of translation. The relationship between the author text, translator text, and she says that a translator is both a receiver as well as an emitter. Okay, in the process of communication, a translator is both a receiver in the sense that the author writes the text. The text is being read by the translator. At that time, he or she is a reader. Okay, they receive the message from the text. At that time, they are the receiver. Later on, he or she translates the text, and then it becomes emitter. Sorry, there is a slight mistake in the diagram that I have given. At the end of it, it's an emitter, okay, not a receiver. That's my mistake, sorry. So from translator, author text receiver, to translator text emitter. Okay, he or she is emitting the message. So they are receiver as well as as emitter. And translation is seen as a creative activity, creative process, where they are writing a text to a new language. They are producing a new text in a different language. So the process of translation is no longer viewed as a secondary subservient process. And the translator is in almost the same position as an author, in the sense that in the target language, he or she, the translator, is also an author of a new text. Now, according to the history of translation put forth by Susan Bassnett in Translation Studies, according to the chronological order, she starts from the Roman period, and that is like the time of Horace and Cicero, 1st century BC. And in the Western, they are considered as pioneers in the Western concept of translation. They translated different texts. And the primary reason for translation was language enrichment. Okay, enrichment of the Roman language specifically. So they translated from Greek texts. Greek texts were translated to Roman language, and new words were coined, phrases, information was translated, and that enriched the Roman language. And hence, since the main reason was language enrichment, the focus was on the target language and the target text, not on the source language. And the method they used, they were at that time two ways of translating, two main ways of translating: word for word translation and sense to sense translation. Word for word is literally what it means. They are translating the same word to the target language. The word that comes closest in meaning is chosen as the word in the target language. And sense to sense is a more loose translation, in the sense that the idea, the message is given prominence, not the correct word. Okay, the overall integrity of the message to be passed to the target language was given more importance. Now, the translation process happening at that time was mainly based on the law of reason. Reason was given prominence. And there was no concentration, no focus on the rigid notion of fidelity or being truthful to the author, the source text being in a prominent position. None of this mattered. What mattered was that the language needed to be enriched, they needed to translate, and target language and target text was in prominence. Now, moving on to the period of Renaissance, pre-Renaissance, Bible translation period. Now, Bible translation, that's interesting because from what I know, Bible is the most translated text in the world. Not considering that as a religious text, but as a book. If you translate it in that way, that's the most translated text in the world. And the first translation that's recorded, Hebrew to Latin, Saint Jerome's translation of the New Testament, that was in AD 384. Now, the role played by translation here was disseminating the God's word. And hence it had this holy nature associated with it. So again, it was seen as a holy act. Okay, you are disseminating the God's word. And that's how it started. Hebrew to Latin, St. Jerome's New Testament, AD 384. Then much later, Wycliffe's complete Bible translation to Middle English. And the focus of this translation was to reach the layman in the vernacular language. Bible had to be accessible to the layman. Anyone who wanted to understand what is written, what is God's word, had to be able to understand this language. So it was translated into Middle English. This was again followed by Tyndale's translation of New Testament in 1525 AD. Now, what is important about this translation is that it was in print. The earlier versions were in manuscript, handwritten and engraved and all that. But Tyndale's was in print, and that was kind of like the beginning of the press, the print trade, books garnering more prominence, books being available to more and more people, more and more copies of books being available to the populace and all that. So accessibility to the text again played a major role. And translation again was a prominent role played in this dissemination of knowledge, dissemination of the God's word as such. Then followed by that followed a slew of Bible translation, a string of Bible translations in different languages, and each Bible translation borrowed and revised from the previous translation. So it underwent a lot of embellishments, additions, omissions, all that. Then we come to the age of education and the vernacular. This was the time when the monarchy, the kings, the people in power, commissioned English translations of classics and scriptures from Latin. Okay, they needed textbooks, they needed to spread the word, they needed people to read, and not everyone knew Latin. So it had to be translated. So the main people of this era are Roger Bacon and Dante, 13th century, and both advocated the role translation played, the didactic and moral purpose played by translation. Okay, and the commissioning of translations, the book that was the text that was translated, the need for translation, it had a very clear political role to play. Then follows the early theorists, the age of Renaissance. So we see this gap between religion and science moving further and further. The gap was widening. So 15th century saw a rise in translations due to printing techniques being available, and it further led to an increase in attempts to formulate more theory of translation, theory of writing, everything. Great voyages and discoveries of outside world opened up scientific discovery and radically altered the perspectives of the people. And again, there was a need for dissemination of knowledge, all the scientific knowledge, all the travelogues of the people who were traveling across oceans. So the travelogues, they had to be translated. People were interested in reading about what was happening across the world. George Chapman's epistle to the reader, which was again written in the 15th, 16th, beginning of 15th century, played a major role. And he talks about translation, the act of translation, more about the rise of translation and the role played by translation in dissemination of knowledge, why we need translation and all that. Again, Renaissance upheld the notion that translation is a primary activity. Okay, nobody was much bothered about the author, whether the text was original, whether the text was being authentic, whether it's close to the original, all that. Translation was viewed as a activity of its own, primary activity. Then we move on to 17th century. Here we see monarchy versus developing parliamentary system. There is this confusion, there's this conflict, constant conflict. So translation again played a major role here. So translation of classics in France, a lot of classics were translated in French, and again English people followed whatever the French did at that time. So all the French books were translated further into English. Dryden and Pope, major figures during this time. In 1680, Dryden, in his preface to Ovid's epistles, he talks about three major types of translation methods. That's metaphrase, paraphrase, and imitation. Metaphrase is word to word, again, translation, different name for word to word. Paraphrase is sense for sense translation. Third one is imitation, where there was more freedom for the translator. So it was a more creative kind of translation. And according to Dryden, paraphrase was the best and most balanced method for translating. Then we move on to the 18th century. Again, moral duty of the translator to contemporary reader was found as most important. And the essential spirit of the text had to be upheld. So the primary focus was on the source text, which led to a large-scale rewritings of earlier text to suit the current taste. So Dr. Johnson played again a major role in that. He wrote a lot about translation, aspect of translation in Life of Pope, which was written between 1779 and 1780. Then we move forward to Romanticism. This age, as we know, concentrates more on the question of imagination and not on originality. Okay, there was a move towards emotion from reason, and most of the authors tend the translated text, the focus was towards emotion and not on reason. Now, Victorian age, I'm going a little fast because we have a lot more to cover. Moving on to Victorian age. Victorian age treated original text as a property. Okay, and this original text could be read only by a select few who knew the source language, and hence it gained a lot of interest in these people. They had this feeling of superiority, and also the whole idea that primary text, I mean, the original text, the source text, is again taking the primary position. So throughout the ages, we are seeing this move from focus on source text to target text. How there's this constant change over the periods, but it's always cyclical. It's either source text taking up the major role, then the next stage it will be like target text, like that. Now, according to Matthew Arnold, in during this time, translator must concentrate on the source language text. Okay, the focus is again on the source language text, and the translations helped in the growth of a national culture. It was no longer seen as enriching the target culture. There was pride in one's own culture. Okay. So the concentration is on the source text, but they had their own pride in the target culture, whichever culture the text was being received in. So again, there is this foreign feeling to the translated text. They had this feeling that, okay, this is from a different culture. Now, 20th century. 20th century, as we know, lot of the imperialism, colonization, the countries, different countries getting independence, moving away from the imperialistic powers and all that. World wars, lot of strife, internal strife, external strife, power struggle. But maybe due to this particular time period, they again held on to the notion, the Victorian notion, Victorian ideals. They focused more on the source text. And the source text had to be read to get to know what exactly is being said by the author, and hence only a minority of the people could read it and understand. Okay, that again played this power position. Later, we come to the 21st century, and now translation has developed into a entirely different discipline. Okay, so translation studies as a discipline, it's a very young discipline, mainly because the name translation studies was coined from a paper presented in 1972. Okay, so the name translation studies was suggested by James Holmes in his essay, The Name and Nature of Translation Studies. He originally presented this paper in 1972 in a linguistics conference. And later on, he developed this into a chapter, into a entirely different paper. And this was again published in 1975, and in book format in 1988. So what James Holmes talked about in his paper, The Name and Nature of Translation Studies, is, first of all, viewing translation as a separate discipline, giving it a name, choosing a name for it. And as we know now, it was selected, that name, translation studies, was selected. And his paper also dealt with the scope and structure of this discipline. Okay, and this he explains in his map, what is now famously called as the map, Holmes's map. This is Holmes's map, and as you can see, he has divided it into mainly two branches, pure and applied, which again goes into theoretical, descriptive, everything like that. This is not the full map. Okay, so from pure, we go into theoretical, descriptive, then theoretical, we go into general, partial, that again divides into medium restricted, area restricted, all that. Now, medium restricted, under medium restricted, it again divides into three: human translation, machine translation, and mixed translation. Okay. Now, human translation again is divided into interpreting and written. So, under human translation, interpretation is the translation of oral text, oral translation, and then the translation of the written text as such. Interpretation then again went on to a separate field altogether. Now there are universities offering interpretation studies as a separate subject altogether, and you can choose to major in that subject. Now there are interpreters in almost all major languages. If you are a politician, if you are a scientist, if you are going to a different linguistic community, if you are presenting a paper, say a Russian scientist is coming to India and presenting a paper in New Delhi, his first language will be in Russian. He might not be that comfortable with English, and people in India might be more comfortable either in Hindi or English. So there need to be an interpreter who will be doing interpretation of the paper, or they will translate the paper into a target language, and that paper, that translation of the paper will be given to the conference attendees to read. We also know how parliamentary sessions will have simultaneous translations. You see all the MPs, MLAs, they'll be wearing earphones. They are listening to the interpretation that's given, okay, in their own separate regional languages. So they are not listening to music or anything. They are listening to the speech or whatever is happening, the debate that's happening in the language that they understand. So that's an example of interpretation. So translation studies has come a long way, and interpretation has again another field. Then there is audiovisual translation, dubbing, voiceover, adaptation, subtitling. 21st century has seen a lot of research and development happening in translation studies. Advertisements are translated in different languages. So the Hindi advertisement, when it comes to Tamil Nadu or Kerala, that will be translated, dubbed or voiced over into Tamil or Malayalam. So translation studies has moved a lot, even though it's a young discipline. It has translation is being practiced in different arenas now. Translation is a business, even as a very rich kind of business. Almost $4 million worth of more than $4 billion worth of an industry. It has developed into a separate industry by itself. So if you need to, if you're a businessman or if you're an academician and you need to translate your contract or your academic paper into a different language for a bigger audience to understand what you're talking about, you need a translator in that different language. Okay, you need it to be translated. And there are technical translators who are taking up that as a different business. And it's going to flourish more. It's going to improve and induct more people in it. And the need for translation is increasing in 21st century. Now, moving on to another type of classification. Okay, so the next classification that I'm going to talk about. So Holmes's translation classification is really on the language basis. Okay, it's purely on a linguistic sign basis. Okay, but there are other kinds of translation happening, other methods and mediums involved, and Roman Jacobson's classification talks about that aspect of it. So Roman Jacobson is a Russian-American linguist, and in his essay on linguistic aspects of translation, he put forth a three-pronged classification of translation. Okay, the process of translation. First is intralingual or rewording. So intralingual is in the same language, the sign systems of the same language. From that sign system, one language itself, inside that language itself, you are translating using different words of the same language. Example is dictionaries, paraphrasing of a concept or a sentence. So you use different words to talk about the meaning conveyed. Research scholars will be very familiar with the idea of paraphrasing. We do that in our daily life. If you're writing your thesis, dissertation, whatever it is, you do a lot of paraphrasing. So you'll be familiar with this concept. Now, next one is interlingual or proper translation. And this is from the sign system of one language to the sign system of a different language. So from one language to another language. Examples are Bible translation in different languages. The same text will be translated into multiple languages, different languages. Okay, it could also be multilingual, bilingual dictionary. So say English Hindi dictionary, English Hindi dictionary. There is intralingual translation as well as interlingual translation happening here. A word, if you check a word in this dictionary, you will get a synonym of the same word in English as well as the meaning in another, say Hindi. So that's interlingual translation and intralingual translation happening in the same text. Now, the third and the most interesting one, according to me, it's inter-semiotic translation or transmutation. Okay. Now, inter-semiotic translation, that's from one sign system to a different medium altogether. Okay. Or from one medium to another medium altogether. The message is being passed from one medium to an entirely different medium. That could be a book to a movie translation. It could be a comic book being translated into a video game. Okay, it could be a movie, say something like Manchitrathazhu, which is remade into Tamil as Chandramukhi. Again, that same movie is remade into Phulaya in Hindi. That's inter-semiotic transmutation happening. Now, you must have watched at least one such movie, or you might have read a book which was later on translated or adapted into a play, a stage play, a drama. It could have been made into a movie. It could have been made into a web series. It could have been made into an entirely different comic strip, anything of that sorts. Okay, video games, short stories, anything, any different genre, any different medium, it could happen. Now, I'm going to give you some examples of that. So, I'm hoping that at least some of you have watched these movies, or at least you have heard about them. So, Makbul, Omkara, and Haider, they are known as the Shakespeare trilogy adapted by Vishal Bharadwaj, award-winning director Vishal Bharadwaj. So Makbul came out in 2004. Makbul is again adaptation of Shakespeare's Macbeth, Omkara, Othello, and Haider, Hamlet. Okay, so he adapted the Shakespearean trilogy. So there is inter-semiotic translation happening here. The drama, the Shakespearean dramas were translated, first written into script form, and then that was made into a storyboard. That was then again made to a movie. Finally, it has come to the screens, a visual format. So all these visuals that I'm showing you, I have taken that from Google Images. Now, Jane Austen. Okay, Pride and Prejudice, you might have heard about it. If you haven't, well, you have heard it now. So Jane Austen is a well-known novelist of English literature, and she has written 6 complete novels during her lifetime. 2 were published posthumously. These 6 novels have had multiple adaptations in multiple mediums, not just one, multiple mediums. And Pride and Prejudice is, as far as I know, the most adapted, translated adaptation was happening for this one novel, Pride and Prejudice. Pride and Prejudice BBC miniseries, that's the first visual that I'm showing you, starring Colin Firth and Jennifer L.A. Again, sorry for the bad pronunciation of the names. The BBC miniseries is very well known. Okay, this Pride and Prejudice BBC miniseries is kind of become a cult classic of Jane Austen enthusiasts. Whoever has read Jane Austen novels, if they like the novels, they go and watch the miniseries or the other adaptations made. Now, the BBC miniseries came out in 1995. There were previous adaptations that came out in 1940 and all that. This one I have chosen because it's more well known. Now, 2005, again, another adaptation came out of the same, but this was for the screens. It was simultaneously released in the UK and the US, starring Keira Knightley and Matthew McFadden. Now, these are like what you call it as inter-semiotic translations. Most of it has been sticking to the original for the cultural interpretations, the dressing style, the characters, the plot, everything. Okay. Now comes the third one. Now, Pride and Prejudice starring Aishwarya Rai. I'm hoping that you have heard at least about this one. Now, this is an Indian adaptation. Okay. The characters shift, most of the characters at least shift from the UK to the Indian subcontinent, India as such. And it has a lot of cultural aspects that is Indian. Okay, so the adaptation, this adaptation has made it more familiar to the Indian audience. The story, the well-known story has been adapted, focusing on the Indian audience, but the language of the movie was English. Again, based on the novel Pride and Prejudice, Seth Graham Smith in 2009 wrote a parody novel. Okay, it was a zombie novel. And the characters, the names, everything is the same, the plot line, even the sentences, the conversations and all that, almost 75 to 80% was same. But it was taking place in a zombie-infested setup. So Pride and Prejudice and the Zombies, it was well received. As you can see, New York Times bestseller and all that. Now, what happened with this adaptation is that it received a graphic novel in 2012. It was illustrated and it became a graphic novel. It had a video game released. It was adapted into a audio book. So multiple adaptation of an adaptation took place. Okay, so Pride and Prejudice and the Zombie itself is an adaptation. Multiple adaptations of that came out, and it was again well received, very well received actually. Later, another movie, Pride and Prejudice and the Zombies, was made. Okay, a movie based on this same was made. I haven't added that visual in this. If you're interested, you can go back and check. Now, some other famous Jane Austen novel-based Indian screen adaptations. Aisha, which is based on Emma, the novel Emma. And in Tamil, Kandugonden, which was based on Sense and Sensibility. Sense and Sensibility, the novel has had multiple adaptations in English, both mini-series as well as movies, starring Emma Thompson and all. Now, these are the few well-known Indian screen adaptations. If you recall any of them, you are welcome to share them. And know that the process taking place is translation. It's inter-semiotic translation in play. So this is the kind of diversification that has happened in translation studies to this day and age. What I can share in 45 minutes is only this much. There is lot more to it, in depth, theoreticians, different theoretical aspects, theories, uh, based on different languages, regions, the kind of development that has happened, the discussions and debates that's currently happening and going to happen in different languages and linguistic communities. In India itself, India is a multilingual country, so a lot of translations are taking place, and it's going to snowball. A lot of discussions are going to happen on translation studies. So you can read in depth about more concepts in translation studies, inter-semiotic translation, etc. What I'm showing right now are some of the texts that I have used, quoted in the during the lecture. You can go back and read them. You can check the bibliography of those texts to find more text to read about translation studies, different aspects of translation, and become more aware about the field. I hope that more and more people will come forward and become interested in translation studies and translation. You can become translators yourself. If you are not interested in translating as such, you can at least be aware about the discipline of translation studies, of the process of translation, etc. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And if you have any questions, please post them. So while others are asking questions, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
So what do you think about lost in translation? What do you think about that?
The concept of lost in the idea of lost in translation, or the book? Which one? Hello?
Yeah. Tell
Can
me. Yeah.
Yeah, so are you talking about the idea of lost in translation,
Yeah.
or the idea?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So basically, you see, that depends on the perspective. Again, you yourself said that it's like a puzzle. Okay, that there is no one single way to go about it. And again, translation is a very creative process. So say I am translating what I read of, say, the text that you have written. What I understand, what I have experienced while reading the text is what I will be translating. Okay. It might be, say, 75% of what you have actually conveyed. It could also include 25% of what has not been included in the text. Okay, because that comes from my personal experience, my own knowledge base and everything. And as I am translating in a different language, that embellishments will always be there. So if something is lost, something is also gained. So you can't just say that it's a loss causing activity as such. There is always a gain and a loss happening, and there is no perfect translation as such, because the complexity of different languages are different. The kind of linguistic aspect, the syntax, everything is different. So you might not have the same kind of word. Culturally different words might not be present. For example, we have this one word for ice, snow, fog, everything in Malayalam, manya. Okay, while in English there are multiple words to show the different aspects of it. Mainly because, well, southern tip of India, we don't experience snow as such. Maximum is fog or mist. The same way, we have monsoons, different monsoons. So we have multiple words to explain the kind of rain that's happening. Chattal Mala, Tuanam, then Perimara, all that. Okay, so we have multiple words for that kind of a concept. So if you are in a foreign culture, if you're from a different culture, if you're translating from that, say, English to Malayalam, you might not have this word to explain of, say, ice, snow, all that. certain culturally charged words might not be there in that culture, in that language. So something has to be lost, something has to be gained. Um, so there is
Okay,
a
there's
question.
yeah, one more question. It is said that in
Yeah.
relationship something certainly gets lost. What is your take on that? Yeah.
Yeah, that's similar to what we have discussed right now. There is always
Yeah.
a loss, kind of a sense of loss that's happening. Some uh, aspect of it, it will be lost. It will always be lost. Okay, you're not the same person. Even Rabindranath Tagore, while translating Gitanjali, okay, when he wrote it in the Indian language and when he wrote it in English, it's not the same. If you go back and read it, there is differences. So the author himself translated. Even then, there was losses. He had to. He was forced to suit the aesthetics of that different language and all that, to stick to the kind of lines, the structuring of that literary aspect of that particular language. So there will always be a loss happening, but remember that there will always be a gain at the same time.
Yes. Okay. There is another question. Do
Yeah.
we have any regional movies directly translated from English novels, and how the theme was dealt?
Uh, Directly translated, adapted, yes. As I
Yes.
explained, Kandugunden, that's from Jane Austen's English novel Sense and Sensibility. If you haven't watched it, please go and watch it. And if you can read the text as well, Sense and Sensibility, it's almost the plot line, the characters, most of the instances that's happening, it's almost similar. Okay, but if you watch the movie without knowing that it's a adaptation, you will think that, oh, it's a really good movie, such poetic songs, such melodious songs, acting, the different characters, such wonderful story and all that. Only if you are aware about the novel Sense and Sensibility, then only you will know that, oh, okay, this is an adaptation, this is from based on a different novel from an altogether different culture, from a different language and even time period. Okay, almost two centuries.
Yes. Thank you. So here's one more question.
Yeah.
How could we be able to get the deep surface of the author while it's translating? Uh, can you see the question?
Yeah,
Example,
I can see the
you could,
question.
yeah,
Kanchana, right? How could
yes,
we be able to get the deep surface of the author while it's being translated?
from
Okay,
Nigerian
so
language to English.
yeah. So if I'm if I understand your question well, what you mean is that how could you understand what deeper meanings the author had in mind while you're translating that text, as you're from a different language, as you're a translator who is not native to that particular language, the author's language as such. What you can do is you can familiarize yourself with the culture. That's another aspect of translation. You become not only aware about their new language, you open up your mind towards a different culture, the aspects, their way of life, their perspective on life, everything. So you can familiarize yourself from that aspect of it. And if you want to transfer that into your target language, you can either if you find closer concepts in your target language, you can use that, or you can give a glossary of it at the end of the work. Some translators do that. They retain the source language, source word as such, and they give a glossary. Okay, they give a glossary at the end of the text as such. You can do that. um, that's maximum what you can do. Say if the author is alive and well, if you get a chance to talk to them, get an interview and talk to them. But say you're translating Jane Austen, she has passed away like 2 centuries before, you can't uh, you won't be able to talk to the author as such. So what you can do is read and become aware about the kind of life they led, the time, the aspect, the political, socio-political changes that they lived through, so that you become aware. Okay, so this influenced them in life, and this led them to write such a text. So that's what you can do.
Okay, thank you so much. There's one last question.
Yeah.
Can you suggest some translated works on which research can be based? It's asked by Abhiram Abi.
Uh, if you are, I'm not sure whether you're basing it on literary works, textbooks as such, novels or something, or movies, because if you're basing it on intersemiotic translation, you have a whole lot of other mediums available. You can work on comics, you can work on advertisements, the subtitling of movies, say Bahubali, how Bahubali was subtitled into other regional languages, how the same movie was remade into three different languages and released at the same time, the reception. So the audience reception is one area that you can work on. You can work on different novels uh, that has been translated, that have multiple adaptations, but be careful. You have to have a grasp of the target language, target culture, source language, source text. If you're completely foreign to it, you might find it difficult to work on it as such. So work on something that has not been endeavored before. In that way, that will stand out. You can work on, again, advertisements, you can work on dubbing, you can work on the translation industry as such. There's knowledge text translation, that's textbooks, science textbooks, NCRT textbooks that's being translated, that's knowledge text translation. You can work on that. There are multiple options available for you. I hope I have
Okay.
helped you.
Okay, thank you so much. So I think we have come to the end of the session. We really learned a lot, and I also thank all the participants for your time. And I would like to thank our team as well, and a special thanks to you, Aparna, for your wonderful
That's
time.
my pleasure. It's my
Yeah.
pleasure. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you so much. And for the participants, I have posted the feedback links. Please complete it, or it'll be open only for half an hour. You will get your certificates. Thank you so much. Have a great day, people. And also, please do subscribe to our channel for more webinars like this. Thank you, and thank you, Ms. Aparna. We'll be closing the session now.
Yeah.
Okay.